So I noticed something a little while back when I was making my first PSSR vs FSR4 video, specifically while I was comparing Spider-Man 2, and yes, I'm just now getting around to making a video on it. Both the PS5 Pro and PC versions of this game have enhanced ray tracing over the base PS5, which is to be expected. This includes additional effects such as ambient occlusion or being able to increase the quality of the resolution of the ray tracing. Now, most people would have expected that maybe Insomniac Games created some enhanced ray tracing for this game for an eventual PS6 remaster or a PC version, and, you know, when the PS5 Pro came out, they would just take those PC effects, maybe scale them back a little bit, and then offer them on that console. But that's actually not at all what happened. I'm almost certain that both sets of enhanced ray tracing features were developed completely independently of one another and at completely different times, years apart maybe. See, I think the enhanced ray tracing on the PC version of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 was developed by Nixxes, and seems to just be an evolution on the enhanced ray tracing that was in the PC ports of the first two Spider-Man games, specifically Miles Morales. The PS5 Pro version of the game, however, I think uses enhanced ray tracing that was created directly in-house by Insomniac with no involvement from Nixxes whatsoever, and this is actually the newer set of effects that was developed probably mostly recently, actually. Because of this, you get some really fascinating differences between the implementations of the ray tracing effects between both versions of the game, even when the effects are labeled something similar or outright stated to be the same thing. So in this video, I'm going to go through each individual ray tracing enhancement that was applied to each version of the game, and then I'm going to compare them to show how they're similar and how they're different. The base PS5 version of the game does have a little bit of ray tracing in it. It has ray trace reflections at half resolution, and it uses ray tracing to draw the building interiors that you can see through the windows, and those are also at sub-native resolution. PS5 Pro has these features and then also lets you add ray traced key light shadows, ray traced ambient occlusion, and it lets you increase the resolution of the reflections and the building interiors. The PC version does not have ray-traced keylight shadows, instead it has a full ray-traced shadows implementation that replaces the regular shadow maps. It also has ambient occlusion, it also lets you increase the interior and reflection quality, although those can be done separately whereas they're grouped together on PS5 Pro, but in addition to that, it lets you increase the ray-tracing geometry, which increases the quality in the reflections. You are forced to turn this increased geometry on whenever you use the ray traced shadows and ray traced ambient occlusion. It cannot be shut off, so just keep that in mind in these comparisons. When you're seeing ray traced shadows on, that automatically turns on the enhanced geometry, but not the increased reflection resolution. Confused yet? I think I'll probably be able to simplify it a little more now. Let's start with ray traced keylight shadows on PS5 Pro versus ray traced shadows on PC. Ray Trace Keylight Shadows on PS5 Pro does not replace the built-in shadow maps. What it does is it replaces the distant cascaded shadow maps with Ray Trace Shadows. Turn Ray Trace Shadows on PC, and the regular built-in shadow maps are completely replaced by a Ray Trace Shadow implementation. This includes distant cascaded shadows, although it seems to do it differently than the PS5 Pro. This sounds overall better, and in some instances it is, which you'll see in this comparison here, but it actually does have its own problems. Moving foliage, such as leaves for example, is not in the BVH structure, so therefore it's not going to show up in the ray trace shadows. In addition, the distant cascaded shadows, I'd personally think don't look as good as the ray trace keylight shadows on PS5 Pro, although a lot of people may not even notice a difference between the two. Now for this next comparison in the same scenes, we're going to keep the ray trace shadow implementations on, and then we're going to turn on ray trace ambient occlusion, and yeah, this one on PS5 Pro is just much better. In fact, the PC version of ambient occlusion here seems to be broken for some reason. I don't see shaded areas being filled in like they're supposed to. And just for good measure, here is all of the scenes lined up with every single ray traced effect in the game turned on, including effects that we're going to be talking about later on in this video. The next effect we're going to compare is the building interiors. Now on PS5 Pro, the reflection resolution and the building interior resolution are tied in one setting, whereas on PC they're completely separate and they can be toggled independently. So here's the base PS5 version of the setting running on PS5 Pro. Here's reflection and interior quality maxed out on PS5 Pro versus reflection quality and interior quality maxed out on PC. And for good measure, here's both scenes with all ray tracing effects turned on both platforms. This one's very straightforward, so really both kinda look the same here. Now finally we're going to focus on reflections, and this one's pretty interesting actually. You would think that the reflections implementation should be identical on both platforms because it's such a straightforward effect, but that's, again, just like with the previous effects on here, that's not the case at all. Here's the base PS5 setting running on PS5 Pro, and a rough approximation on PC with half-resolution reflections and regular ray tracing geometry. What it looks like here is that the reflections implementation on PS5 Pro is a newer, more modern version of the effect that was developed for Spider-Man 2 on base PS5, whereas the reflections in the PC version seem to be lifted pretty much right out of the first two Insomniac Spider-Man games that were on PC. At half reflection resolution here, it's clear that the denoiser, especially on the PS5 Pro, is much more modern than the PC version here, and therefore is a lot more stable with way less grain. While on PC this can be negated by using DLSS ray reconstruction if you have an RTX GPU, but I do not. I'm using RDNA 4, so it's the software denoiser for me. On both PS5 Pro and PC, you can change the reflection resolution to be native resolution instead of half resolution, and when you do this, the quality between both versions evens out quite a bit. Now PC does have one additional trick up its sleeve. Remember earlier I was talking about the ray tracing geometry setting. This is not available on PS5 Pro, but it actually has been available on PC since the second Marvel Spider-Man game, Miles Morales, since that PC port. Do this, and the quality of the ray trace reflections on PC greatly increases, vastly surpassing what's available on PS5 Pro. And finally, here's the same scene with all of the ray tracing effects turned on in both versions, again, so you can see what both games look like at their best. And that's going to do it for today. I decided to do this because the folks at Digital Foundry just have a really packed schedule right now with all the recent game releases, so I figured I'd take the scraps and make this video instead because I just find this really interesting. We know that Insomniac and Nixxes were working on a PC port of Marvel Spider-Man 2 even before the game released on PS5, so it kinda makes sense that it's using some of these older ray tracing implementations that can brute force them to be still better than the PS5 Pro versions. Now, I'm just interested to know if Nixxes is going to keep using their in-house ray tracing implementations for their future PC ports of PS5 games, or if they're going to start using the effects that were developed by the studios themselves, like for example Insomniac in this case, having developed the ray tracing effects for the PS5 Pro version of Spider-Man 2 instead of using the ones Nixxes made for PC. I personally think that eventually Nixxes and Insomniac are going to unify their ray tracing efforts and use the same implementations across both PS5 Pro and PC. This saves time and money on development and ensures that all versions of their games are on pretty much the same page technologically. But who knows, I would love to hear some input from somebody who knows more than I do. Maybe somebody from Nixxes or Insomniac sees this video and comments on this and adds some more context. It'd be very interesting.